David, so the start of your book, The Heart to Start, has this quote from Picasso: only put off until tomorrow what you're willing to die having left undone. So I want to talk about starting something new. I mean, there are so many things to get into there. For example, this podcast is something that I've been thinking about doing, had it on our planning for my business since the very beginning of the year, and maybe it was an idea before that. And so when is the right time to actually move forward on something? Do I need to rush, make sure everything's done today because I may die tomorrow and it's never going to happen? Or do ideas take time to kind of percolate and build in your mind before you're ready? Because I think in one of your other books, there was something along the lines of like, you could either keep something as just this dream or fantasy for your entire life, or the complete other end of the spectrum is to be burnt out trying to get something done too quickly. So,
Hmm. Yeah, the best point. That's tricky. I mean, I think we can certainly fall into what I like to call creative crushes, which is like if you think of like a romantic crush, part of what happens is that you in your mind you kind of have this relationship with this person, but you almost don't want it to end. You don't want to say ask them out or tell them how you feel or whatever, because even if you succeed, like the best case outcome, you're gonna like share bills and chores with them, and then one of you is gonna die. Or they'll say, "No, I'm just not interested in you at all." And so either way, you have to face reality, and you're gonna have to like you can't have that fantasy anymore. So it can be really comforting to have some kind of a dream in your mind that you are hoping to one day achieve. And you know, when you talk about having a podcast that has been an idea for you for a while, I know that like when I started my podcast, that was it might have been like 10 years that I was like thinking about podcasts. Oh, I mean, easily, probably more than that. Listening to the first podcasts in like 2004, 2003, I remember thinking, oh, maybe I should try a podcast. They didn't start one until 2015. And once I did, I kind of felt like, oh, I should have done this sooner. But at the same time, it felt like I did a better job at it, maybe because I put it off and did other things in the meantime that I could learn from. So, I mean, I think that the important thing isn't necessarily that you are taking action on the idea, like the thing that you are fantasizing about, but that you're taking action on some kind of thing. And sometimes it helps to be maybe strategic or I don't know if realistic is the word about what it is that you're gonna start with. Whatever you can do that's like the easiest, usually scaled down step is often best. I think that we have this thing I like to call the fortress fallacy, which is that we tend to dream big. We tend to dream well beyond our abilities, and that's really great. That helps us be ambitious, but at the same time, that can be very paralyzing because then we don't really know where to begin. We imagine this great big fortress and how we're going to build it, but we've never built like a lean-to or a cottage or something like that. Now, I want to be clear here. People often think that what that means is, oh, you break the project down into steps. No, because breaking a project down is into like bite-sized pieces basically just turns your project into chewing gum. Is that you just end up chewing and chewing and chewing. You don't ever learn how to put something out there in the world. I'm talking about a project that is a way scaled down, much smaller project that will help you build some skills that might be obliquely related to some larger project that you have. So, I guess to sum up that, to answer your question, then like the best time is now, but it might not be uh, that you are starting with something that bears any really concrete and obvious resemblance to the vision that's in your mind.
okay. And then what would you recommend for someone who they're not quite sure what to start on? So it's like, oh, I want to start a business. I have a handful of ideas, or I want to write a book, or I have multiple interests, and so I don't know what to start my YouTube channel about. I think even before getting started, I think that that could be one of the things that holds someone back from starting is that like they're not quite sure which is the right avenue to move forward on.
Yeah, I mean, it almost doesn't matter which avenue it is. I think the thing that does matter is that you are putting yourself in contact with reality as quickly as you possibly can. And you know, like if you want to write a book, one way to do that is you're getting on Substack or you're getting on Medium and you're writing and you're publishing on a daily basis. One of the things that's going to happen is that you probably are not going to have your expectations met uh, in the beginning. And so that could be an exercise of just finding out, well, how badly do you really want this? How much do you like this? But if you do keep at it, you do start to get those little breakthroughs coming where you are getting the feedback, you are getting into a groove, and you are importantly learning the skills of starting and finishing, which are just as important as the skills that are involved in whatever it is that you're trying to do. There's these really intangible skills of how good are you at maybe forecasting what's an idea that you feel you can follow through on, or forecasting how that idea is going to turn out, or um, dealing with that last 10% issue of what it feels like right before you hit publish, right before you ship, and you feel like, oh, this is horrible and I want to go hide, but you kind of do it anyway. Like those are skills that are really important. And if you avoid those things, then you just end up inflaming perfectionism so that you, like I said, chewing gum, your project turns into chewing gum. It becomes this thing where, I mean, how many times have I talked to somebody who's like, oh, I've got this novel that I've been working on for 17 years and I've had, four different editors look at it and I've hired cover designers five different times. And at first I attended this workshop and then I attended this other workshop. It's like, okay, it's pretty obvious that what's going on here. Like, it's not that you don't know how to write. It's just you don't know how to ship. So I think that the quickest, whatever can quickly get you in contact with reality in that way.
It's like with a startup and lean startup and, getting something like this minimal viable product in front of your audience to be like, hey, is this something that they're interested in? What feedback do they have? And then it's like, do I need to completely do something different or not? Or do I move forward? And so I think that's always a decision somebody has to make. But if they never actually hit publish on something, if it's their business idea, if it's, testing, moving to Medellin for a week and see if they like it, and then okay, maybe I should pack up my things and consider something longer. But it's like those little steps of like, hey, I've tested this and I've gotten feedback, and then maybe do something a little bit more detailed, more elaborate, like you were saying, like build a hut before you try to build this huge fort or castle.
Yeah, I want to be clear about something with that too, though, is that like testing, I don't know, like there exist people in the world who like they might have a business idea and they'll just go test it and then be like, well, that's not a good business idea. Maybe this other business idea it works. And they run some kind of a test and they do this sort of lean startup methodology thing, and they seem to be indifferent to what it's about. Is it fun? Can they stay motivated doing this thing? I'm not one of those people, so I can't speak to that process at all. So I would like to add the caveat that, like, for me, like, part of the testing is also like an internal getting to know my own motivation mechanisms. I might have like the most lucrative appearing idea in the world right in front of me, but if I'm not interested in it, I'm not going to be able to do it. And so part of it is really like a curiosity with my own behavior. It has been throughout everything. It's like, okay, I feel this way. I'm super excited about this. When have I felt this way in the past? All right, that time. Oh wait, and I did that, and then I burned out. And then, this other time I was wrong about this. This other time I was wrong about that. Well, that other time this thing worked, and kind of like a three-armed bandit problem or multi-armed bandit problem of like, okay, where's the little place where I can get a handhold here? There's this one technique that I have been thinking about and writing about a lot lately, which I call surround and conquer. Um, so, for example, for myself, I have some kind of aspiration to write a novel, or yeah, I'm in process with that now, but it's something that long ago that was just merely an aspiration. But the problem was I don't didn't read a lot of novels. I didn't feel compelled to read a lot of novels, but I wanted to write one. So I kind of asked myself, well, okay, well, what's related to novels where I can build a skill, but that I'm already interested in? And I realized, oh, I really love movies. Well, why don't you write a screenplay, David? Well, because that sounds terrible. Because who's going to read my screenplay? I don't want to be a filmmaker. That sounds, I'd have to work with people and be in a certain place at a certain time. It's just, that's probably not going to work. But I do love movies, and movies have stories in them. And so what I did was found certain movies that I liked that were based upon novels or novellas in the case of like some of Stephen King's works like Stand By Me and Shawshank Redemption, and then like watched the movies, read the novels or novellas, read the screenplays, and then next thing I know I'm reading novels, and then next thing I know I'm reading novels that before I'm watching the movie, and then the next thing I know I'm reading novels just because I'm curious about this novel and it doesn't even have a movie. And reading novels where I'm like, oh, this should probably be a movie. And as I'm doing that, I'm learning about storytelling, I'm examining things, and I'm like getting immersed in this subject. And that has slowly sort of surrounded the resistance that was around this impossible to attack project, and has really softened those defenses.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think trying to evaluate the thing that you want to move forward on. So like that's interesting of like, hey, I have this goal. It's outside of the nonfiction that you've been writing, but obviously you've developed some of the other skills that are involved with that. I think it was in Pathless Path, they were talking about how somebody that was in real estate, people would always ask him, like, hey, should I invest in this or not? Or should I get started in real estate or not? And he would always try to talk them out of it. He's like, look, if someone's motivated enough to do this, they're going to do this, even if I tell them not to. And then why do I want to talk someone into this and have them start because of me and realize that they don't like it, and they end up quitting 6 months later. So it's like they need to find somehow this internal motivation to do something. It's not my job to convince them that this is a great idea or not.
There's a great movie about J.D. Salinger who wrote The Catcher in the Rye. I don't know how true this is. I haven't followed up on the historical accuracy of it. But in the movie, his teacher um, basically keeps giving him negative feedback, like telling his work is terrible, if I'm remembering this right. And then, later he finds out, well, he was actually just doing that just to sort of test how much he enjoyed writing, how much Salinger enjoyed writing. And of course, Salinger wrote The Catcher in the Rye, and then kind of became a recluse and continued writing for like the rest of his life, and like never published any of it. It was just like he loved to write. Like I think you need to have that sort of thing, or it really helps to find that. Oh, I want to be careful about like find your passion, because there's some nuanced ideas about that. But like find this thing that like you kind of feel like you have no choice but to go down this path. But that is going to involve you having to make real attempts in various things, and hopefully having some failures along the way, uh, so that you can sort of test one thing against another.
Yeah, I like this quote from one of your books as well. It's like the real courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what. From Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird. And so I think it's
Hmm.
that type of focus of like, I've got to do this. There's no way that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and not make progress on this idea that I have.
Yeah, I mean, I just surpassed my 18th year of being on my own, and that started with just waking up one morning after on my first day of like after being fired, and saying to myself like, okay, Here's the deal. Do what you're curious about because that's like the one thing that you're going to be able to keep doing and that's going to keep you from going to find another job or like going and playing Guitar Hero or something like just follow what you're curious about. That has taken me to South America, where I live now, where I've completely designed my entire life around that. And it's been 18 years, and I've had some wonderful successes. I've sold over 100,000 self-published books, but it's still a challenge every day. But the reason why I do it is because I can't imagine what else I would do.
What do you think about having to do something because of circumstance versus like some of the stuff we were talking about earlier? It's like you're just kind of in your head and it's just like, hey, I have a day job. It's kind of okay. I really don't like it. Like you never want something bad to happen, obviously. But it's like I don't know how many stories of, Pat Flynn was let go from his architecture job and then created a
Yeah.
guide about, passing the test and then has this huge business now. And
Ah,
there
yes,
was
yes.
like my girlfriend, my ex-girlfriend from high school's father was let go and then got like a way better job afterwards. But it was like you're just kind of happy with the status quo. And then but it's like those things sometimes like are the spark for something that's way
Yes, I
better.
have some
It,
thoughts here, I think. Yeah,
okay.
like you have some kind of a vision, and it's not going to be a clear thing necessarily, especially if we're talking about creative things. Like if there's some sort of career path that you want to follow, and it's already kind of laid out what degree you need and the companies that you might work at, well, you can be pretty strategic about that and maybe make it happen. But when you have like a more vague sense that you just don't want to work for other people or you want to do something creative and it's maybe one of these seven things, um, I think just naturally that's not going to follow. I mean, we were talking about the pathless path. It's not going to follow the path that's been laid out for you already because so much of society thus far has been built around or in the last century or so has been built around this idea. Okay, you do this, you earn this degree, you fill out these bubbles on the test, do this homework, and then you're going to get this job and you're just going to keep doing that and then you're going to get a pension or retirement plan or whatever, and this like just do the things and you'll be fine. That's just not how creativity works. The reason why anybody has a job is because somebody innovated something previously, is that uh somebody got lost and went down paths where they weren't sure where they were going, or they put down dots that they weren't sure how they were going to connect. And then when they finally found, oh, when you do this, this happens, then that created like an entire field. And that's just naturally going to be difficult, or it's naturally going to take time. Timing is going to be off with that sort of stuff. Where like I find one of the most valuable things I learned as a writer is that if I'm looking for some great insight, I can sit down and like try to hash out ideas and stuff, but that's really just kind of to get the brain working about the problem space or kind of the direction that I'm going. I know that at some point I'm going to be reading some random book that you know not thinking about the problem that I was trying to solve, or I'm going to see something on social media, or I'm going to be having a conversation, or I'm just going to be on a walk or in the shower or whatever, and that's when the idea is going to come to me. Or I might even or I'll see something that will remind me that, oh, that's the perfect solution to this sort of thing. And no amount of like sitting at my desk and gritting my teeth was going to make that happen. And I think that's true of a lot of lifestyle things where you can have these vague visions and you can start sort of like exploring and looking at different things, but then the opportunity will just present itself. Like I own a cabin in the mountains outside of Medellin, and I've never been somebody who like dreams of owning a home or something like that. But just for various reasons with convenience and stuff, it's an idea that I had in Colombia. Also, it involved like moving out of the city, which was going to be a big step too. And that problem had like these other sort of roadblocks to it, such as like, okay, well, if I'm going to live outside the city, I need to be able to drive. But to be able to drive, I need to have a license. To have a license, I need to like take like 60 some hours or whatever of such and such class. But, it started with like, okay, I'm going to just rent a car, drive around outside of the city and kind of like look what is where and stuff. And that nothing came directly from that, but through one thing after another, eventually one day a house showed up that I was like, oh, I can't pass this up.
How do you balance that, you think? Because for example, before we started recording, you were talking about just the consistency of your newsletter. I know your podcast you put out weekly for a long time, so there's like a pressure
Yeah.
to start something. I've got to be consistent with it. It has to be weekly, versus this like I'd like to have a cabin. I'd like to have a book. So like there's something about things coming to you just at a complete
Yes.
random time, but then there's also a forcing function of a certain rhythm you get into.
Yeah, like your obligations can help you achieve your aspirations. Your obligations are the duties that you feel to others, maybe a duty that you feel to yourself or some sense of your identity. But then your aspirations are they come from within, and your aspirations are often quite vague. That you want to do something creative. Your obligations tend to be a little bit more specific, like, oh, I told my spouse I would take out the trash, so I better do that. I want to be a reliable person. Um, and when it comes to creative work, creating obligations for yourself can really help you can help you bring you closer to those aspirations. It can help you create things. And so the way that I like to think about it is I like to try to um, sort of design my scope based upon my schedule. Design the thing that I'm going to do on a regular basis based upon what resources I have available. And that can be time, that can be just like resources like money, that can just be your creative appetite as well. So, for example, with my newsletter, Love Mondays, um, that is basically I have like a 100 to 200 word short essay every week, and then I share like a book or a cool tool for thought or a quote. Now, there's various reasons why I chose that exact format, but amongst them are that like I want to be somebody who is constantly thinking about ideas. I want to be somebody who is consistently reading books, thinking about interesting quotes, and am naturally coming across interesting tools that I'm excited to tell people about. And so, while if I was left to my own devices, I would publish far fewer um, issues of that newsletter. But by making that obligation, by making that schedule, I push myself just enough to where like I'm not freaking out that I need to get this newsletter out each week. Um, and I'm glad that I'm thinking about the ideas in a more developed manner, that I am saying to myself, "Oh gosh, I don't have any books to recommend. I better read more books. Uh, I better find more quotes to go through my notes, things like that." While I'm glad that all that is happening, like I would be doing far less of it if I hadn't created that obligation for me. And so this is something that you step up throughout time. Now, did I wake up one morning and say, "Oh, that newsletter, this is the newsletter that I'm going to create"? No, it was an iterative process. First, I had a newsletter that was like, I just copied what Ryan Holiday was doing. He has a newsletter where he shares different books that he's reading, and he writes several paragraphs about all these different books every month. I'm like, okay, I love books. Let's try that. So I tried that. That newsletter worked out fine, but it just didn't feel quite right. And then I started to think about, well, what I want to have more things in there, like quotes and tools for thought, and I want to share more of my own ideas than I want to be like concentrating on other people's ideas in books. And so I started to think about, well, what is a way I can systematize that? So what's something that I can make a repeated process that would help me, that I could build something around that. So I started something where I called it Friday Night Highlights. I only called that to myself. Nobody knew that I called it that. I just started sending it to my list. And my idea was, okay, I have, 30,000 highlights in Readwise. So I'm just going to find one highlight each week and write about that idea, expand upon why I thought that highlight was interesting. So that gives me, it's something that's helping me read and engage with the ideas that I have found interesting. And it's something that where I'm getting a chance to think up in my own way about those ideas and expand upon it. And it's something that I can turn into a system. I wanted the newsletter to be bite sized. I don't want it to be a long thing where people are like, oh, well, I don't have time to open that because I know how he is with those. I want it to be like, oh, well, I'll just open it now because it takes 2 minutes to read it, and for the payoff to be there. And so for a while, I ran it. I called it a pilot to myself, and it was just Friday Night Highlights. And then after a while, I realized, look, here's the parts that aren't really working here. Here's the parts that could be better. This is how this newsletter could be more engaging and interesting and get people to open it. And then after that pilot period, then I started to hash out this idea of Love Mondays and the format that I've settled on. And then that's when I announced it and made it official and did it. So, but it was several months of running some kind of a pilot first that where I didn't have all the obligations in place. I didn't have all the plan in place, but I was testing out how the plan might work. And that wasn't just based upon, yes, what people I thought people would find interesting, yes, what I thought people would open, but given what I know about my own motivation, about my own interests and passions, what do I have a good chance of continuing to do consistently?
Yeah, no, totally. I like that, and it again gets back into just like the importance of being in the arena to getting started on something. It's like there's no way to just invent this, on the fly. It's like Camden, one of the other people I interviewed, has a popular travel YouTube channel, and it was like tested a whole bunch of things, and now it's like him and his wife spend a month in different locations at a time, and so he does like the 38 things I wish I knew before going to X place. But again, it's like you have to kind of get some stuff out there, figure out I like this, I don't like this, the reaction of the people that I'm producing this for, what that was, then kind of settle on something that you're like, this is something I can be consistent with. It seems to resonate, and are able to then move forward after, having some bad ideas in the beginning.
And importantly, this is, I think, a way that our educational system and our society has and continues to do us a disservice is that we are used to being in this world where you kind of know what the plan is going to be, what steps you need to follow. And when it comes to actually creating things, it is nothing like that. And so people get frustrated too easily. One, they don't start because they get paralyzed. They think that they're going to have the perfect plan from the beginning. And then when they do start, then they get frustrated quite easily because things don't tend to work out the way that they had expected. And so then they don't end up finishing either.
Yeah. And then, so your book on that I found really fascinating on mind management versus time management. I think it's something that I struggle with, and I'm like toying around with to actually get more stuff done. So there's two different things I think there were well, there's a lot of things, but you're talking about like the different stages of creativity, and we've kind of hit on some of this a little bit, where you can't just all of a sudden like have an epiphany and get it out in the world. There's different stages that something needs to go through before you're ready to publish this great work of art that you spent time on. So maybe we talk a little bit about, we have the idea and getting started, but then starting is just, yeah, in a week or so after we record this, I'll be publishing the first 3 episodes of my podcast, but like that isn't the end of it. There's a continuation of that, or any other creative project. So how do you think about going through the actual process of creativity?
Well, what you're talking about is the four stages of creativity, and it's really funny that we've known about this for a long time. They're based off of a speech that was done by a brilliant scientist in the 19th century, Hermann von Helmholtz, at a banquet that was thrown in his honor, and he kind of got up and said, "I always found that I couldn't have ideas come to me at the writing table. They only came to me when I was walking through the wooded hills in sunny weather and feeling relaxed. But um, you know, I could only make that happen after I had really turned a problem over from all angles in my mind, and then after that, had some kind of rest." And so I think this is something that we all experience, where we have ideas in the shower tends to be the archetypal place for people have ideas. Well, you're in a relaxed state, and they tend to be ideas about things that you were previously attempting to find a solution for, that you some sort of problem that you've been immersed in. But we don't tend to think really intentionally about this sort of stuff, and that for me has been a revelation. Was that if you are banging your head against the wall 12 hours a day and you suddenly get 15 minutes of flow where writing comes easily to you, that banging your head against the wall wasn't fruitless time. As a writer, for example, the work that you do today is worthless without the work that you do tomorrow, in that you were banging your head against the wall, and it's not until you actually write something where it becomes worth something. But when you write something and it becomes worth something, it's worth less if you didn't have the previous banging your head against the wall. Now, how can you do that with a little bit less banging of the head, which is not good for the head? So you really have to intentionally think about what stage are you in with whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. This is why people think that writer's block exists, is that they sit down to try to write something and it's just not coming to them. Is it is it that you just don't know the subject? Is it that you haven't gotten in touch with what you're trying to express? You know, in one case it might be that you do some research. In another case it might be that you do some free writing, where okay, you're writing your shitty first draft. This is the thing that you're going to publish, but you are at least like getting the wheels turning. So the four stages are preparation, incubation, illumination, verification. Preparation is that turning in the mind uh, from all angles, looking at the problem. And then incubation is that rest time that you have between that and trying to actually solve the problem. And then that illumination is that aha moment that we're always looking for, the one that we're sitting at the writing table, sitting at the desk, trying to come up with the solution for. And then finally is verification, which was where we say, okay, was this actually a good idea? We tend to try to do all those things at the same time. You'd be in like a brainstorming meeting or something, and somebody will have an idea, and then somebody will be like, well, that's not going to work because that's not how you brainstorm. That's one of the rules of brainstorming, is just no judgments of the ideas. You have to be the same way with yourself, is you just get the ideas out there. You don't have to publish them right away, and then maybe come back to them later. It's funny, like in our cultures, we have an understanding and an appreciation for the incubation that has to take place. For example, there's the expression that we should sleep on it. In Spanish, it's consultar la almohada. It's consult the pillow. Like, we know this, but how many of us actually say, you know what? Before I go to bed tonight, I'm just going to take 5 minutes to brainstorm the worst ideas I can possibly think of related to this problem. And maybe in the morning, I'll have a better idea of what I should do about this. But that stuff really works.
Yeah, so there's this like, I should just be able to white knuckle, and maybe how we started off this, of the Picasso quote of like, do something today and don't put it off till tomorrow. But there are a lot of things that require much more than just something that could be done in a particular day. And you gave a bunch of examples of things that just are going to come in terms of like an epiphany, and then it's done. Like I think you mentioned Paul McCartney, like the Yesterday song. And so I don't know if you want to talk about like the myth versus reality of
Sure.
of something like that.
Yeah, so there's this great story about the Paul McCartney composing the song Yesterday. It came to him in a dream, um, which makes it sound like, wow, that's amazing. Effortless, one of the greatest songs of all time, one of the most covered songs ever. And all he had to do was dream about it. Well, it turns out there was a lot more to it than just that. Yeah, he dreamt this melody. He got up to his piano and he made sure that he had it. And but then he spent the next 18 months kind of playing it for different friends, saying like, have you heard this before? Like there was no app that he could just like hum the tune in and find out whether it
There's
was
no
an original
Shazam.
song or not. He had to like actually go around to different friends and musicians and be like, "Have you played this?" And like the his bandmates got sick of him for it because he's just like he's always talking about this song, this stupid song. So it really took a lot of well, first of all, there was preparation before that insight. Was that it did turn out that yeah, it did have some similarities to certain songs that he very likely heard when he was younger. He was already a musician. He was able to get up to the piano and play the song that he heard in his head. I know I've had songs in my dreams, and I don't have any way to really capture them like that. You have to have the skill to do that. Then one of the really interesting things was that as he was developing the song, he developed placeholder lyrics for the song, and there's a performance you can see online of him on the Jimmy Fallon show singing uh, the song with the placeholder lyrics that he had come up with. The placeholder lyrics were scrambled eggs. Scrambled eggs. Oh my baby, how I love your legs. Not as much as I love scrambled eggs. Like that was he was going around playing that for people. Like I don't think the song would have been as successful if it had been called scrambled eggs. So he did have that aha moment, which was while he was sleeping. And then he ended up having another aha moment, something like 18 months later, when he was on vacation. Happens to be when you're relaxing. He's just been on the crazy tour. He's been skyrocketed into fame in the last a couple of years, and he's on a vacation and just like riding through the countryside in Portugal, and starts scribbling notes on the back of a brown envelope, and that's where he came up with the lyrics for yesterday. So it sort of classically followed those stages, as those stages don't necessarily always go in order where this project is done after these four stages. Sometimes there's elements of the project, such as the lyrics, where you have to set the conditions for that illumination to occur, for that aha moment to occur.
And there's probably tons of other project songs and things that he had going on in the meantime as well. So it's like, all right, that's on the back burner. We're gonna make this work someday, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, and who knows how many of those just never became anything. Like that's something you have to be open to as well, is that you have to be open to coming up with ideas that are just not going to work out. Like that's one of the things that I think when you're trained in creativity, or when you have like experiencing in working with creative things, you learn and learn to take for granted. But I think most people just sort of expect ideas to just happen. So I studied graphic design. When I was in graphic design school, there was this exercise that we were gonna do in sophomore year that looked so arduous that like it made people change their major in freshman year, which was that we knew that the following year there would be this assignment where we would have to draw an apple 100 different ways, and we could like see the sophomores' work pinned up like 100. You have to come with 100 different like graphic representations of an apple, little thumbnail sketches, and it kind of follows a pattern that I'm now quite used to, which is that you start thinking like, I got nothing. Okay, right, I've got like five. Oh, I got to like six ideas. All right, well, I'm out. I've got nothing. And then you push a little bit more, and you've got more. You start building on the ideas that you had before. You get to the end, and you think, well, I could do 100 more.
Yeah, what do you think about quality versus quantity when you're getting started on something?
Uh, Quantity seems to always win. I hate to say that because I don't always follow that myself, but in my experience, there's just no substitute for picking some kind of a deliverable that you're going to create and doing it every day for about 60 days. In my experience, it takes about 60 days. I don't think there's ever been a time. I mean, I can think of a couple times when this has worked for me. Like Medium, I built a pretty big following on Medium, and that started with me saying, okay, I'm going to write first every morning I'm going to write a 500 word thing, and I might not even know what it's going to be, and I'm just going to write it and publish the thing, whether I feel like I'm ready or not. But volume seems to be huge. I mean, we see that with what Shakespeare had written so many different things, and a lot of it's really terrible, but some of it's Hamlet, which is amazing. True of Mozart symphonies. There's an academic that studies this named Dean Simonton, who basically found this correlation between amount of output and career success, with very few exceptions. Like you mentioned, To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee being one exception. She wrote like one book in her lifetime. I think there was another one published posthumously or something, but one book. Or Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind and said, "Why would I ever put myself through that again?" But generally, quantity beats quality, and maybe the more that you don't believe that, the more important it is for you to test it out, I think. Because I'm certainly somebody who didn't believe it until I tested it out. I don't live it every day, but it is definitely true.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on routine? I know you've talked about it in a couple of your books, but like you just mentioned, do something for 60 days straight. If it's,
Yeah.
writing on TikTok, because if it's like do something daily, weekly, on some type of like seasonal basis. For me personally, I feel like the day is the easiest thing to understand. And so it's like I'm going to go to the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'm going to run on Tuesday, Thursdays. It's just one other like curveball versus like I go to the gym every day for 45 minutes and just consistently doing something versus to try to, because the same thing with recording YouTube videos. If I go a week without recording something and then I like I'll do the whole video twice, and like the second one is way better than the first because it just like takes a bit to get back into something. Tend to
I
work
think
the best for you.
routines are they're just great ways to get more from less, in terms of energy, in terms of emotional, whatever emotional fortitude or discipline it takes to get you to say right or to go to the gym. When you know that you're going to do it, you just don't second guess it, and you also, through that routine, are able to just do things faster and more smoothly. Obviously, it can get you stuck in a rut with stuff where maybe you're not meeting your full potential at a certain point, but especially in the beginning of practicing a craft, I feel like it's essential, because you end up building skills that uh, you can use forever. And by the way, I look at routines the same way that I do any other project, where I don't start off being like, "Hey, for the next 60 days, I'm gonna be doing this." I start off saying like, "Oh, let's do a TikTok video." Oh, okay, and like, okay, well, let's see if I do one tomorrow too. Okay, maybe I could do one every day this week. And then you start thinking like, all right, well, what's kind of the format that works for me that I can kind of repeat? It's like making cupcakes. Yeah, you can make a batch of cupcakes and put the batter in the cupcake tin, and they're all kind of the same. And you can put them in the oven for the same amount of time and bake it for the same amount of time, and you can batch it in that way. But then you can make all the cupcakes different by just like putting different frosting on them. So like coming up with some way to make the format of it a routine as well, I find is really helpful. You don't have to do it for the rest of your life, but it's something you kind of test out and try to find what is a routine that you can keep doing, and then you can set certain goals for yourself for carrying out those routines. Yeah, they're incredibly important. I mean, I feel like I create routines for everything.
And as far as routine, you also mentioned different mental states. So, for example, if you're gonna, there's certain things you need to do to come up with, like, let's even just take TikTok, for example. Like, I'm gonna create videos for the next 60 days. You have ideas, you have editing, you have recording, you have scripting, you have all these different pieces. And so, how do you think about routines versus like the energy you have? the type of things you like to do at certain times of day, or as opposed to just I can do anything at any point in the day in any order, versus like getting into a routine based on, how you think, how you feel, the different mental states you might be in.
Yeah, I mean, so many of us look at our to-do list or whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish in a day and just stare at it and assume that they can do anything at any time. But some things are just easier to do at certain times or in certain mental states, and that you're also working with that those 4 stages of creativity too, where yeah, you maybe you want to sit down and have ideas for this thing, but you don't really know all the material super well. And this is something that I found in writing my first book, where I was banging my head against the wall 12 hours a day to get 15 minutes of flow, was that what felt like one kind of work was actually many different types of mental work. So, like, some people might think of writing as one type of work. Well, there's a lot of different pieces to that. There is the uh, what I call generate state, which is generally what people think of as writing, where you're going to sit down, you're going to write something, and it's going to have some chance of being published with a little bit of tweaks. And then there's the polish state. That is where you're maybe doing the editing, maybe you're fixing some facts here and there. There is an explore state. That might look a lot like the generate state, where you are writing, but you're like really not sure at all about what you're writing. You're just sort of writing to help your brain identify the gaps in your knowledge. And then there is the explore state might also involve like reading, where you're doing something that's themed around Renaissance Italy, and you're reading the letters of Niccolo Machiavelli just because you find him interesting, but you have no idea what you're going to find. That's Some people might call that research, but what's really research is when you have a specific question to that you want to answer, and you go search for the answer of it. And those are very different mental states. Like, one is very open, and another one is very closed, like a sniper rifle or something. And when you start looking for those patterns and start gaining a sense for what states are you in different times of the day, or if you're stuck on a project, or uh what can you make progress on in the state that you're in, or if you're in a state and something you encounter an obstacle that behooves you to change to a different state, like, is it worth changing states? So if I'm like really rolling on something that I'm writing, and I know the material pretty well as far as like I need to for writing the narrative that I want to write, but then I come across something where I'm like, oh, what's the date that guy was born? That's important. I need that. Well, I'm just going to put it in brackets and keep going, because then I would have to like change mental states, and I don't want to mess up the flow that I've got going. I can always come back later in a different mental state. It's really not important what it's not gonna change what it is that I'm going to write. And so it's something that you have to continually be mindful of. Like, what state are you in? What could you do in this state that would be easy for you to do? What challenges are you running into? What state would you maybe need to be in to meet some of those challenges? And can you either get yourself into that state, or identify some sort of time or context when you might be in that state and be able to attack that sort of thing? Um, Things like that can really make a difference, and decrease the amount of time that you are banging your head against the wall.
Yeah. Do you find so for me, for example, I spent 6 months in Central America from November till May, and so I was getting up for sunrise every day with my brother, and like being outside, more of like crazy how like set my circadian rhythm of like having so much more energy during the day, and usually falling asleep between like 9 and 10 o'clock, which for someone who thought they were always a night owl, completely changed things. And then also with that realized the best time to actually like write a script for a YouTube video is probably first thing in the morning. Like I just felt the
Mm.
most clarity at that point in time where it's harder for me to get that back later in the day. So it's like if I have a call with my team or am I doing something else or out having a conversation with people, it's like very hard for me to bring that focus down to what you called like the generate phase.
Yeah.
So that's
I
something I
mean,
could do early, but then it's kind of like maybe I could do it late at night, but like during the entire kind of 9 to 5 typical day, it's like my brain is really not in the state to be able to do that type of work.
oh, I'm totally the same way. Those morning hours are just so critical. Maybe I only write for an hour, 2 hours in the morning, sometimes half an hour or something, but, like, if I lose that, if something interrupts that and I am not able to do it, I didn't just lose that hour or half hour, I lost the whole day. In some cases, I lost the whole week, because I like to go on, like, a weekly routine or a weekly rhythm where Mondays for me are especially important. I really get deep into what I'm writing when I'm working a book on a Monday, and it's especially important because I've had the weekend to have that incubation, and then I've also recharged another mental state. I've like replenished my mental energy, and there's just not going to be a better time for me to really get into the potential of what I might write throughout the rest of the week. And it tends to be that like Monday's hardcore, Tuesday's pretty good. Wednesday, Thursday, we're speaking on a Thursday. It's better time to like have podcast conversations and stuff. I'm not going to be like incredibly productive if I was writing right now instead, for example. And it just kind of goes in that sort of wave, that rhythm.
And how does the environment affect the work you do?
Yeah, well, there's a great book by Donald Ratner called My Creative Space, and he's an architect, and he's written about a lot of the research about creativity and our spaces. And so, for example, high ceilings or you know large views can be really good for brainstorming, for like more expansive exploration, mind state sort of work. That would be, I guess you would call it preparation. It might be a time for illumination. It sort of depends on where, how well you know the problem space. And then the lower ceilings, more closed spaces, maybe even a focused light in a dark room. That sort of stuff is better for being more focused and doing more uh, uh, that polished mental state work, the analytical stuff, the things where you're trying to uh, achieve accuracy, things like that. You know, and a lot of it can also just be that you just decide that you decide that looking at this view is making you creative, and now you're creative too, or you decide that hey, I'm just gonna go push my desk into the closet today and bear down on the editing on this book or something. And because you said that that would work, then it would work. But the research also supports those two things.
Yeah, because reading that in the book was just like eye opening for me. Of like I totally see those different things in how I get work done. For example, so it's like to go to it mentions a little bit about noise, and so like a certain noise level, like there's a certain level of creativity, probably not something analytical or like you're not going to edit your novel at a loud coffee shop, but if it's something that you're trying to connect the dots on something or brainstorm your next project, that noise. And you even mentioned like that I had this too, where I just joke sometimes like with my business partner who is from Venezuela, of sometimes I'll just like drown out conversations in Spanish. So like if it's an English conversation
Hmm.
at like I'll understand the conversation like four tables over, but if it's like in another language or even if it's in Spanish, I can just kind of like shut off the like what is actually being said, and it's like kind of like the Charlie Brown like what, and so I just hear that in the background, and then I'm able to focus and do creative work even if I wanted to pay attention. Then Spanish, for example, I could understand.
That's actually one of the things that I really like about living in a Spanish speaking country is that if you are at a cafe, uh, and if you don't understand the language super well, you can just sort of drown it out. Whereas if you're hearing your native language, it can be very distracting. Now, I will say also that, um, while one time of day might put me in a certain state that makes me conducive to one type of work or one type of environment might make me more conducive to it. I try not to get too dependent on it. Like I try to design everything so that I'm all that stuff is flowing along with the way that my projects go, and I actually run into very little resistance along the way because of that. Because I know that like, oh, if I'm getting feeling a little bit stuck in this way, I can just make this move and I'll make progress in this other way. But there is something kind of nice when life is just going to throw you into chaos a little bit every once in a while, and sometimes it can be interesting to say like, all right, well, my morning got ruined because this, that, and the other thing. Well, let's see if I can write in the afternoon. And maybe it's really hard. It usually is, but you try to do it anyway. Or that conversation in the coffee shop, I had the brown noise on, but now I'm not going to do that. And I'm just going to try to see if I can focus, even though that is really distracting to me. I like to think that there's some value in that as well, uh, just to not be not to not get too precious about things. I think that that's an important thing as a creative, um, especially maybe not early on. Like early on, I think it's good to go ahead and be precious, do whatever you got to do to like make things happen. But as you gain skill, I feel like it can help to try to challenge yourself and say like, okay, I can write in this setting or that setting or whatever.
And for getting work done, how do you use other tools or work with other people? So, the two things that come to mind in terms of like, having a podcast and newsletter and all these different things of like, do you have a team that helps you with anything? And then also with where things are now, like how do you use AI or how do you bring that into what you're doing for your work?
Yeah, I work with people less and less actually. For a while there I had like an assistant and I was all about like, oh, what are the different ways I can save myself a bunch of time. But I just sort of found that there was always this part of my brain that was taken up by that sort of thing. And I find it a nice forcing function to say like, well, if I don't have time for it and I can't automate it, then maybe I it's not that important. Now, with some things like when I did have a podcast, or when my podcast was active, I had a production team, and so working with them, I used Airtable to just load in. Here's all the stuff you need to do to make the post, and here's the process to follow. And this is how the um, episodes are structured and things like that. And that's all a part of sort of designing your routine as well. When you are working with other people, and that's one of those obligations that can help you achieve your aspirations, is that you bring on somebody to work with you on something, and now you feel accountable to that person, and you create some kind of a system because that just helps you work more efficiently. And it feels very constraining from a creative standpoint, but creativity often comes from constraints, and so that can tend to work out nicely. Now that AI is getting better and better, I'm using that a lot. I never use it to write anything, but I do use it to just be better at a lot of stuff that I wouldn't otherwise know how to do. I think we'll see what AI does to jobs, but I think one thing I'm finding is that I'm getting a lot of stuff done, that would have required me to hire somebody, but I wouldn't have bothered to hire them to do it. Maybe not because it wasn't important, but mostly just because I would rather uh, be writing or reading or by myself. I mean, okay, I'm like I have rudimentary programming skills, like not great at all. Front end stuff is more my what I'm trained in HTML. But I have used AI to create basically like a roll your own Substack on my blog and WordPress. So it just like created an RSS feed just with its hidden category. And then that hidden category, when it publishes, that RSS feed triggers an active campaign. And that has streamlined my process a lot. I'm currently using it to help me write code for interfacing with the Amazon Ads API. There's a lot of manual processes that I need to do if I want to keep my Amazon ads running well. They take an incredible amount of time, are incredibly boring, so I end up just not doing them usually. But thanks to ChatGPT, I now have a series of scripts that I can use to automate those processes, and I might build that up into something a little bit more sophisticated, where maybe it's totally automated and I don't have to touch it, or maybe I'm creating a software as a service thing that somebody else might be able to use, other authors might be able to use. And for writing, I use it a lot. I don't use it, as I said, to write anything, but I use it to improve the quality of the things that I'm writing. So, for example, the book that I'm writing right now, which is titled Finish What Matters, has a lot of historical stuff in it, has a lot about Renaissance Italy, has a lot about Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. And while it does still take a lot of reading and research to learn about those things, and I enjoy that, being able to talk with ChatGPT about those things really gets me to a level of conversational fluency with those a lot faster. And a lot of times it really just helps me build the confidence to write about the subject and get a sense of like how much am I stretching the truth here or whatever, given my narrative. You find with a lot of this historical stuff, historians are writing about these things as if they really happened, but the evidence that's available is actually not terribly concrete, and there's a lot of different perspectives and there's a lot of different sources, and they will often be contradicting themselves. But you can talk to ChatGPT and say like, would it be a stretch to say this, that, the other thing, and it'll tell you exactly, like, to a splitting hairs degree where you're wrong. And it can give you sources too, and you of course follow up on those sources, but you can kind of walk away from it being like, okay, all right, so this is a pretty reasonable point of view that I have here. And that's important when you're writing the sort of narrative self-help nonfiction that I'm writing. Like, I'm not trying to write a historical piece of nonfiction here, but I do want to use history in a way that isn't like just abusing or appropriating these great minds just because it fits what I want to say. I want the things I say to be true. So I feel like it is really helping me write a level of quality of book that I could not possibly have written before. It's also helping make my writing process a lot more kinetic, in that one of the things that I have started doing is that when I am in that preparation stage of writing, when I want to get into um, sort of an extroverted explore stage where I want to express things, but I'm not quite sure what I want to express. I'm not yet in ready for that generate stage. I'll just walk around my neighborhood, which has some nice nature in it. I walk around and I use an app called Otter, and I'll just talk and blabber about what I'm thinking. And then I will take the transcript of that and put it in ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT to sort of interpret it and add structure to it. I'm a very inductive, bottom up person, which I think you are too. And I think that ChatGPT really helps complement that in that it can provide a lot of structure for something when you aren't quite sure exactly what it is that you want to say, and so it will help summarize that for me, and then I'll say, yeah, well, what about this? And then and it'll respond to me, and I'll say, yeah, what about this? I'm just like walking around my neighborhood. It seems like I'm talking on the phone, or maybe I'm just a crazy guy talking to himself. But that becomes a great part of my writing process. None of that stuff goes into my writing program or anything. That is all strictly just for creating the connections in my mind, creating that preparation so that Probably not the same day, maybe not even the same week. At some point, I'm going to sit down at the writing table and things are just going to flow and come out of me that would have never um, come out as crisp or as high quality if I had not had that AI assisted conversation.
Yeah, I can totally that resonates a lot with me. I end up using an app called Whisper Flow, kind of similarly of I'll
Oh,
speak
I've
to
heard of
that
that
into
one. I'm gonna check
something.
that out.
Sometimes you can basically use it in any app basically. So like turn the microphone on, I'll stand up, go for a walk, talk about whatever, and then have a conversation with AI. Well, I'm like, here's an idea I have. And like ask me up to 10 questions about the topic. So I'll like stream of consciousness, ask it to
Oh,
ask me a
cool.
question. And it's like you can ask me up to 10. So it asked me one question. I like talk for 5 minutes about that. Like, so it's going along as I'm giving it more information. It's like coming up with better questions as I'm like throughout the conversation basically. And
Yeah.
I find that I come up with good ideas of like one, like you're saying, walking around, but then two by speaking. So it's like it's harder to do something any other way. And then also it's like I'm not going to want to go through my whole transcript of me talking for 10 minutes, but if AI can ask good questions and summarize and maybe put that into an outline or something that's a bit more structured from, my just rambling for a half hour, let's say. Uh,
Yeah, Whisperflow. I need to check that out. I want to add also there's another one I use called Natural Reader, which once I have like written some kind of a draft, what I used to do was I would like record a really rough audiobook version of something and then load it onto Overcast, and then I can just like listen to it while I'm cooking or while I'm driving my car or something like that. But with Natural Reader, it has AI voices, so I'll just like copy and paste, and maybe a few times in one day, I might copy and paste in a different thing and walk around my neighborhood and just have it read it to me. And again, this is not only being sensitive to where I am in the creative process, which stage am I in, but also taking advantage of that incubation where I'm maybe not even like consciously processing what it's telling me, but I know that I subconsciously am. And it's also um, being sensitive to different contexts, different body states that are useful for being creative that I feel get me to a place that I wouldn't be if I'm just like seated at a chair at a desk, which has its place, but not always.
Yeah, I'd like to spend as much of my time not in front of a computer and not seated if possible, but still be able to do a lot of the work that I do. So that's
Two
something I'm
thousand
hoping for.
dollar, $2,000 office chairs exist because sitting is bad for you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
just don't sit.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. And can we get a few highlights or insights that's come from the book that you're working on? So I mean, we talked more about starting and we talked about kind of process and how you think in your environment and things, but then, what are some of the important things to get something actually across the finish line?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've talked about a lot of that stuff already. One of the more counterintuitive things that I'm finding as I really dig into what does it take to specifically finish creative projects, not just these things like don't be too um, committed to one idea, do a lot of idea dating, be willing to have ideas and not necessarily follow them, be willing to follow ideas to a pretty advanced point and be willing to quit them also. I'm I think that to follow through on creative projects counterintuitively requires a little bit more gentle approach to whether you need to finish everything you start at all. Um, but it's also important to work on that finishing skill. And one way to do that is through doing these little small routinized shipping things where you are building that shipping skill while still building the skills in your domain. I think one of the main insights that I find really fascinating is this difference between inductive and deductive approaches. So
Can you
like
explain
in
that?
yeah, sure. So inductive approaches are bottom up. They're like starting with an observation and building that into a principle. So imagine you travel to a city and somebody walks by and says good morning, and then a little bit later somebody says good morning, and a little bit later somebody says good morning. You say like, "Huh, people in this city seem kind of friendly." Now, contrast that to if you had traveled to the city and your friend told you, "Oh, people over there are so friendly." The first time the guy said good morning to you, you'd be like, "Ah, my friend was right. They said good morning." So when you're making the observations, just people saying good morning to you and developing a principle from that, um, then that's inductive. Whereas if you start with the principle, your friend told you people here are friendly, that's going to guide your observation and say, "Oh, that person who said good morning, this that my friend was right. This place does have friendly people." Now, one thing about innovation is that like some people are just kind of inductive. They like to work that way. They like to just jump into a project and see what happens instead of formulating a plan and then following that plan. I mean, that's just kind of the way that creativity works. And one of the places where I found that dichotomy is between Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, the master painter Raphael. Because Leonardo da Vinci was notorious for not finishing what he started. But Leonardo da Vinci had an incredibly inductive process. You know, he was like compiling all possible human knowledge and like making observations about nature, making all these very detailed dissections and drawings, and um, just fascinated with everything. And it was through that he was able to be very innovative as a painter. The Mona Lisa is sort of the culmination of all of his observations across what we would now call psychology, anatomy, fluid dynamics. How are the mist particles affecting things? Optics, geology. There's some geological observations in the landscape and stuff that are quite interesting. He was able to create that painting because of it's a collection of so much different knowledge. And actually, he never really technically finished that painting. He just carried it around with him. It was just sort of like his sort of testing bed, it seems, for all the things that he knew. Now, Raphael and Leonardo, we have like maybe a dozen finished paintings from him. Raphael was incredibly productive. He was very reliable. He finished what he started a lot, and he was a fantastic painter as well. Not as exceptional as Leonardo da Vinci, but he was able to paint the way that he did because of the innovations that Leonardo da Vinci made. Raphael was influenced by Leonardo da Vinci probably more than any other painter, and it's clear to see the things that he was able to copy. But for him to paint the things he painted, he didn't have to do a bunch of dissections and do a bunch of experiments or whatever. He just kind of had to look at what Leonardo was doing and try to kind of do the same thing. So Leonardo was inductive, kind of had struggled with finishing things. Raphael was deductive and was quite good at finishing things. Now, if you can be a Raphael, I mean, first of all, is that even possible? If you are an inductive person, can you make yourself deductive? It kind of doesn't seem like it. But you can maybe channel your inner Raphael here and there, putting those obligations on yourself so that you can meet your aspirations. And you can still be very, very innovative while working according to your normal cognitive style.
And I mean, we've talked about a ton of different things. Just really briefly, you have a book on the digital Zettelkasten, I think it is. How do you
Yeah.
research, keep track of stuff, come back to things? Because I've gotten a little better of like taking notes of stuff that I consume, but then in terms of like actually organizing to be able to find that, to put it into a book, to put it into a blog post or your newsletter, how do you
Mm-hmm.
just like really quickly, how do you think about managing information? And then, and I guess also being that we're talking about AI, I mean, that probably makes things easier to find now if that's affected how you basically save and store and use information.
Yeah, well, I'll say that definitely the Zettelkasten is an inductive process, which is that you do a bunch of reading and you collect the things that you think are interesting to you, and you figure out later what all that stuff means. You connect those dots later, which makes it appropriate that the real world application of Zettelkasten for myself, at least as a writer, is far messier than the Platonic ideal. So the Platonic ideal is that you have this database full of notes that are all atomized, where just one idea per note, and you can sort of mix and match them and just like put them together like building blocks, and boom, you've got an article, or boom, you've got a book, or whatever. It doesn't actually work that way. I think that's one thing people need to let go of if they're struggling with it. If they have some way that does work that way for them, then fine. I don't know how they're able to do it. The thing is that like knowledge is contextual, and the way that you write about an idea is contextual. Is that it's one thing for me to talk about the Mona Lisa just as a piece of art. I'm going to say different words than if I'm talking about the Mona Lisa as an example of the result of inductive thinking, right? So it's going to be contextual, but it's going to be based upon certain facts that I'm going to want to express throughout. So I have a Zettelkasten that is like, it's been a long time since I organized it because I'm in the midst of this book writing project, and I really only want it to be organized to the degree that it helps me carry out the projects that I want to carry out. So currently, I'm working on some stuff where, like, for example, I was learning about the Impressionists today. And so I'm taking notes for my Zettelkasten, but they're not in my Zettelkasten. They're in like this program called Drafts that I like a lot. And ideally, in Zettelkasten, just going to be a literature note. And a literature note is going to be just like, okay, here's my notes from this one book. Well, no, I don't have that. I've got one like, here's about how the Impressionists started, and it's got notes from this book, and it's got notes from this book, and it's got notes from this Wikipedia article, and it's got notes from this other article. And I'm just sort of like, it's part of the preparation process when I get stuck writing, is that, oh, I don't actually know as much about the Impressionists as I thought I did. Or like, wait, I'm making this claim. Is this true? And that's where I might go to ChatGPT and say, like, okay, here is this statement that I want to make. How much of a stretch is that? And it's like, oh, that part's wrong. Like, oh, really? Tell me what the source is of that. And then it'll send me the source and be like, I don't know. I'm not really convinced by this source. Or it'd be like, oh, okay, that's actually is far different from how I thought. And then I'll go into the literature note and open up the book, say in archive.org. And as I come across different things, like, oh, that's interesting. And I'll just like write in my own words what my interpretation is of that piece of information. And so then I've got that literature note. And then I can write my chapter that way. Now, when the book is done, then I've got a huge inbox full of stuff that I'm going to need to like put in the Zettelkasten. Because right now it's like, if I want to interface with my ideas to create new ideas, then that's when it is nice to have the Zettelkasten well organized. And, I've got my tags, the appropriate tags there, and I've got literature notes here, and I've taken out some different ideas and made them into like atomic notes that link to other notes and stuff like that. And that can assist me in coming up with ideas, but I'm just at a stage in such a big, long project where like, I just don't have time or mental space or need for that type of thinking.
Well, I guess for me, I mean, most people may not know what a Zettelkasten is in any form, but in terms of like, there's obviously like a project based, like I have a book, I have a chapter I'm working on. What are the things I want to do? And, maybe it's like, reading a book, asking AI about a certain painter or something like that type of mix. But then there's probably also a part of you that's like just reading some random book that maybe at some point goes into, something that you'll
Yeah.
use. And so it's like how to, you know, be saving the things that you're consuming in some way, in a way that, for example, there's I've read a most of like Benjamin Hardy's books. There's one like Who Not How, I think it is. Or
Personality isn't permanent.
no, that's another one of his. But it's like Who Not How. So it's basically like hire people instead of like that are experts on it versus like trying to figure out how to do it yourself. But it's like I couldn't remember if I actually read the book or not. And then
Yeah.
so then I was like, oh, I have the Kindle, and then I open it up on my Kindle. It's like on the last page, and there's highlights on it. So I was like, yeah, clearly I went through the whole book, but I don't even remember that. So it's like,
Hmm.
to be able to, consume something, try to remember the most important points of it, which some of it's obviously sunk in. But then to be able to then go and use that for a YouTube video, to write a blog
Okay.
post, and so it's like how to
How to remember what you read? How about
that
that?
that's in it.
Yeah,
Check.
okay, just to not get into the details of the Zettelkasten, that just comes off weird, and in audio, it's hard to describe. I'll describe how I remember what I read, which is something that I struggled with a lot. I mean, there's one book, The Organized Mind, that I have that way, where like there's a bunch of Kindle highlights. I have no recollection of reading that book. And I realized it's probably because the book's called The Organized Mind. So it probably came during some time when I was like, I really need to get my mind organized. Like maybe I just need to read more books. And, I like probably just skimmed through it really fast and highlighted stuff I thought was interesting and just didn't like digest it. And so now what I do is I read almost everything electronically on Kindle. That had to be the case when I moved to South America. And it turned out to be fantastic because having electronic copies of your highlights is incredibly valuable. So I highlight as I read. I follow a color coding system in that there is what yellow, blue, orange, pink. So yellow is just like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Blue is either that's super interesting or that fits a theme that I've been working on. So I'm going to be using that for something. That's blue is like I'm probably going to use this for something. Yellow can often be like if I'm reading a historical thing, I might just like in my mind think about as I'm reading how what information would I want to be able to write notes to summarize the things that I'm reading right now. So it's like I'm thinking about the future version of myself. So that like, okay, this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened. This person is this person, and so I'm like just highlighting that sort of thread, and I'll get to why that why that matters. Orange is like something to follow up on. Here's a book that I should look up. There is a place that I would like to visit next time I'm in Peru. Pink is like that's mostly for words I don't recognize, like new vocab words for me, things I don't know. Now, that color coded system implies that I read on a color device. I don't primarily. I read on just a Kindle Paperwhite, and there's a service called Readwise, which syncs all my highlights from Kindle and from various other things as well. They have a great reading application themselves. And I've set it up so that like if I type like if I put in the notes put dot B, it'll automatically like change that into a blue tag. So that tells me it's a blue highlight. Or dot O, it'll make it an orange tag. Maybe I'm getting too in the weeds here, too complicated. But
But I do run into that sometimes where it's like somebody will mention like an author in a book. You're like,
yeah.
maybe I want to go buy this book or check this out. And then there's something
Yes,
that's
yes, yes.
like, so that I totally get the like there are different reasons for wanting to like, oh, I want to remember this. And
Yes.
I do have the black and white Kindle as well.
And here we are, we're like being sensitive to context here too, right? Because you're winding down, you're like on your couch reading, you're getting ready for bed or whatever. You don't want to get up and like go look up this book, but you really want to check out this book.
Hmm.
And you're gonna have an open loop in your mind unless something's being done about that. So one of the things one of the ways to close that loop is you have your system where that's like an orange, for example, And then with Readwise syncs all my highlights, and then they send me an email every day with I've chosen to have them send me 3 different highlights. Just send me 3 random highlights. And then that alone is enough confidence for me to know that, oh, I'll someday be reminded about this. It might take years, but someday this thing will resurface. Now, there's other ways that it can prevent being falling through the cracks, but that can also, like, I'll see that, oh, this is a blue. Like, oh, that was a good quote. Oh, I'll just tweet that quote right now. Or I'll copy that quote and I'll put it in my like scratch file for when I'm going to tweet it later. So that like
But
later it might be my Love Mondays newsletter.
But are you going through all of the highlights then? So you finished a book today, and then are you going to go through like within Readwise and change the colors of all the highlights, or kind of what's the process? Because one of
Yeah.
the other things that I've been thinking about for my personal brand content is um, a great way to just share ideas I like, where maybe I'm not comfortable enough to come up with the idea on my own, is to just talk about books that I like. So like the first
Mm-hmm.
couple of videos, maybe like 90% the book and 10% my ideas. And then over time it'll be like, okay, I have my own ideas now that I'll talk about in content. But it's like having to boil something down into something that you present to someone as a way to remember it as a,
Oh
so it's like
yeah.
important things of like, if I teach it, then obviously it's going to sink in a lot more than if I just like highlight it right before I went to bed. And then it's like, I don't even know if I read the book or
Yes.
not.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that's, I do that myself. I've got summaries of books that I just really wanted to understand really well. And they're available on YouTube or on my podcasts or whatever. Like, as part of making for what making makes you. It's like, if I do this action, is it going to make me more this type of person? Um, and so, yeah, with a book that I really want to absorb, I'll do all that reading, do all that highlighting, and then with Readwise, I can just export that stuff to Markdown, just a text file. And what I'll do with that is then I'll access that text file through just a plain text app. I use OneWriter is what I use on iOS for that, and it becomes this other little thing that I can do with what I call crumb time. Those little bits of time that you have, like you're like waiting at the dentist or you're waiting for a friend to show up at um, at a restaurant or something. You can just like open up that file with all the highlights in it. I just kind of scroll through, and then you're like highlighting the highlights. So you're like, oh, okay, what's sort of the few words that I would want to put in bold to show me what's important about this highlight? And I'm going through, and some of them I'm just skipping over, like, okay, that's mildly interesting or whatever. And then if my friend shows up, I'll just like put a couple equal signs there and then close the file. So it's this one of these things that you can get in and out of really quick. You don't have to like have a huge time commitment to do. But then over time you get through that whole file and you like highlight the highlights. Next thing you're doing, the next thing I'll do if I really want to then like this is high level, this is like a book that I really want to absorb, is then I will go through that file where I've highlighted the highlights and then I'll just start writing what's called a literature note for Zettelkasten, where I'm like taking each like really important highlight, I'm like just sort of summarizing in my own words. Um, and as I'm doing that, I'm usually getting ideas about like, is that really true? Do I agree with that? Um, and maybe I'll like just put in parentheses like I don't agree with that because this, that, and the other thing. Or I wonder about this, and then maybe I'll look up something on Wikipedia, just sort of like verify if that's right or if that's wrong or whatever. And as I'm doing it, I'm restructuring things. So like the book is structured in a certain way, but then I'll start to find different themes where like, so like what a book that I've done this with is Daniel J. Borston's The Image. So like maybe one is about imagery and politics, how imagery has affected politics, just as an example. And just there might be different bullet points or highlights from different parts of the book that fit underneath that heading. So I'll just type that heading and I'll put the different bullet points underneath that. And then maybe I'll move things around. Like eventually I'll have sort of my brain, my own brain's understanding of this book. That if I was to explain to somebody this book, this is kind of the structure that I would go through. And I've just got like a bunch of notes where I've kind of written my own language in my with my own thoughts and my own words. And there's also a quotes section for like exact quotes as well. of just this to me was the most important stuff about this book. And so from that, I can then write an article, or I could write a YouTube video script if I wanted. But I also tend to have a way better like conversational recall of the book. I think people can relate to being in the situation where they're telling a friend, "Oh, you got to read this book. It's so great." They're like, "Yeah, what did that book say?" Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
but it was good. Yeah,
But it was good. And you don't end up that way when you read a book in this way. And it takes a lot more time. You're not reading quite as many books. You don't have, 100 books this year on Goodreads when you do things this way, but you actually remember what you read and you're engaging with your books and you're engaging with the ideas. And that it's through that you build this corpus of knowledge and understanding, which, by the way, as you do this, um, you just start to absorb the things you're reading better than you did before because you're reading more intentionally, and you don't always have to do the note taking part again. Where I kind of have a memory of now of like, if I come up with an idea of a quote or a story, I can almost always remember which book it came from. So I'll just open up my Kindle and just search and find that passage and go to town on it that way. So not everything makes it into my Zettelkasten because of that sometimes.
yeah. And so if someone is interested in learning more about becoming an author, writing books and then also selling them, there are two books of yours that we haven't really had a chance to talk about. And so I don't know if you want to kind of just really quickly explain those before we wrap
Sure.
up.
Yeah, I got a book called How to Write a Book. It's one that I wrote when I started self-publishing. It's a short book. It's like 40 pages. Actually, you can probably find it free on my website. If you just like go to Kadavy.net and go to one of my blog posts, there should be currently some kind of a giveaway banner on there where you can download it for free. And that talks about different ways to get over writer's block and bust through procrastination and build a habit of uh, getting your work out there and shipping it, and getting a sense of what kind of feedback you're getting about your work, what's really resonating with people, so you can build up into writing books. And then I have another newer one which is much longer. It's actually probably my longest book ever in terms of word count, called How to Sell a Book. And I wrote that in celebration of passing the 100,000 self-published books sold milestone. And I just try to put everything that I know about how to sell a book in that one. And that one is available on Amazon. It's also available on my online store, shop.kadavy.net, as well. You can buy it directly from me.
Yeah. And any last parting words on somebody that wants to get started on a creative project?
Uh, think not about think not about whether you have the time to do what you want to do. Take the time that you have and do what you can with that time.
Yeah, that's great. And then I think you mentioned just a second ago, but if someone wants to learn more about your work, your books, sign up for your newsletter, where should they go?
You can type it really easily. I have a short URL, kdv.co. That'll take you directly to my website. You can sign up for my Love Mondays newsletter. You can probably also find the How to Write a Book for free on one of the blog posts for a limited time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Been great to be here. Thank you so much. It is an honor.